This is a sneaky one, okay? We have this word that, and so we're just deciding what kind of punctuation goes there. So the first two things that I notice are B and D. We have a semicolon and a colon. So we talked about this in another question for this section. Semicolons require a sentence before and after. A colon requires a sentence before, and then we have some flexibility with what comes after. These are the two very consistent rules. Maybe there's the occasional exception with the semicolon, but this is not going to be that. We just need to think, okay, is the first part a sentence? If the answer is no, then that gets rid of those two choices. So just read up to the word that. Polyphenols are organic compounds that. Could you put a period there and end that? No, it's clearly unfinished, right? We clearly need to continue this thought. So that is proof that the first part up to the semicolon, up to the colon is not a complete sentence that could stand alone. Therefore, those would be inappropriate punctuation marks to use. Now, the difference between a dash and a comma in this case is mostly just about choice, what the author chooses. So we do have a sentence and then it gets interrupted. So I'm going to highlight the sentence. Polyphenols are organic compounds that provide pigment that helps protect plants against ultraviolet radiation from sunlight. So notice I've highlighted basically everything except among their many roles. And that is an extra clause. It's an interruption that we're kind of throwing in there. This is the writer's choice to do that. I find that this kind of writing sometimes a little choppy because, yeah, you're kind of moving between thoughts. You're interrupting yourself. It's not a good way to convey an idea, but you can do it grammatically. And basically, we could use a dash to interrupt, but the author has already made the choice and used commas. The end of the interruption has a comma, so the beginning of the interruption also has to have a comma. If the other part was a dash, then choice A would be right. So I think dash versus comma here, it's not like one is right always. It just, in this case, remember, the SAT has written most of the sentence for us. So we have to kind of go with whatever they've chosen. And this is a case of symmetry. We want to start and end with the same punctuation mark. That way, as the reader, you kind of can see visually, where does this interruption begin? Where does it end? It's kind of get like the same marker. One other thing I'll add, though, is there is a general rule in English, and you've maybe heard me say it in videos if you've watched a lot of, especially my older stuff on the old SAT. The word that in English does not get a comma, usually. And that is contrasted with the word which does get a comma. Usually. And this is the problem with comma rules, is there's a lot of usually, right? Depending on how you build that sentence, sometimes a word that normally we don't have a comma with has a comma. And in this case, the that is kind of, the comma is in a place that is kind of weird. It's after the that. So it's not really breaking the rule that I've written down in green here, but it might throw some people off, especially if you've, again, watched my videos, watched other people talking about these rules. That is a pretty common one. The reason it's a usually and not an always is that all commas in English are really just about sentence structure and where we insert these little breaks in the sentence. So it's unusual to insert a break near the word that, but it's not impossible. It could be done. It's much more just that, like, normally the word that isn't going to be the first word of an interruption or an extra clause, whereas the word which usually is, and that's why there's usually a comma before the which. In this case, again, it's after, but there usually wouldn't be a comma before the word that. But there are infinite ways to write sentences in English, and you never really know. And the SAT is good at finding those little places where they know that you're suspicious or you have some fake rule that you've memorized. In this case, we're not really tempted to be by getting rid of the comma because it's just not an answer. But I could easily see it have, another question where that is the answer. So I just wanted to talk about it because it's very frustrating for people who are learning grammar and punctuation rules especially. You really want there to be concrete rules. This word gets a comma, this word doesn't. But English doesn't work like that. So those are good guidelines, but you're really going to need to understand sentence structure to be really competent with the punctuation rules.